Good morning. I'm Dave, one of the pastors here. I'm glad we get to worship together today. You know, the government shutdown a few months ago brought to light a troubling statistic that 78% of American workers live paycheck to paycheck, which is fine, so long as the next paycheck arrives on time and no unexpected emergencies arise. I lived like that most of my adult life, and it can be a bit nerve-wracking at times, but if you're careful not to spend more than you earn, it can work. When the government checks were delayed, millions of Americans couldn't pay their bills or afford basic needs. Other people face this same dilemma when an unexpected trip to the emergency room requires money that wasn't in your budget, or your car breaks down, or your refrigerator gives up. You can't ignore those things. So you spend the money that you would have spent on your other bills on those things because, you can't get to work without a car. You can't store food without a fridge. But then the next month, you get not only all the regular bills again and have to pay off what you owed from last month, you also get hit with interest payments on bills you already couldn't afford. And just like that, this stable system of living paycheck to paycheck quickly spirals out of control. A recent survey by the Federal Reserve Board found that 44% of Americans wouldn't have the money to cover a $400 emergency. Almost 70% couldn't cover a $1,000 emergency. Even among people earning more than $150,000 per year, nearly a quarter of them had less than $1,000 in savings. So one unexpected $1,200 transmission repair or an appliance replacement, which happens all the time, can send people who were otherwise okay into a crisis they can't get out of. The problem, financial experts claim, is that most Americans don't have enough margin to account for the unexpected. But given the chaos of daily life, we should expect that the unexpected is going to happen. Ideally, we're told we should save up 3 to 6 months of expenses, but economists say that the simple step that would prevent millions of people from falling into bankruptcy or poverty would be to save up a $2,000 emergency fund. Because it turns out that most of the common crises cost less than that, right? Of course, people don't do that because saving up $2,000 can be hard to do. It'll require sacrifice and self-discipline. But if we don't do it, we're just a disaster waiting to happen. And I bring all this up today because we can all see the way that insufficient financial margin can lead to a catastrophe when crisis strikes. But emotional, spiritual, and relational margins work the same way. They're just a bit more abstract and harder to quantify. Most of us want to experience more of God. We want to enjoy deep relationships. We want to make a difference in the world. But despite our desire, some of us aren't making much progress towards these things. So this Lenten season, we're in a sermon series called Stuck, exploring those destructive patterns or mindsets that keep us from growing and thriving the way that we want to, or responding to God's invitations. And one of the most pervasive of these patterns in our culture is our unrelenting busyness. If you ask almost anybody how they're doing these days, about half the time, if they don't blow you off with a fine, they'll reply, busy. Our jobs are way more than full-time, and then there's the kids and the friendships and the weddings that I'm supposed to attend and the errands I need to run and the bills I need to get to and that small group I signed up for and the ministry I wanted to do and, sleep. But I'll do some of that if I find the time, but it's hard to do because it's just so much to do. And just one more thing can push us right over the edge. Now, no one would boast about not having $400 saved up to cover an emergency. But we boast about not having the emotional, schedule, and spiritual margins to cover emergencies. This is how many of us live every day, running on the edge of empty, sliding by on too little sleep and too much caffeine and too little time with God or loved ones because we're just so busy right now. Maybe later. We don't have enough margin. But we're fine. We're getting by. until a crisis strikes. My kid has to be hospitalized. My boss needs me this weekend. My roommate or significant other wants to have a talk. My parents called. They need me at home. This school event I need to attend. My friends from out of town, they want to crash this weekend. Or my kid's soccer team made it into the tournament. Yay, more games. The paper I spent all week writing got deleted somehow one day before it was due. We're fine. Until something unexpected upsets the apple cart. And now it's just too much. I can't handle it. So I sleep even less, making me more irritable. So I shout at my kids, or I'm snarky with my friends or my boss, which only creates more problems that I have to solve. But I don't have the time for that right now. The stress builds up until we explode. And this isn't just a modern problem. This is a human problem. In the passage we read earlier, Moses struggled with the same thing. If you'd asked him how he was doing, he would have answered, busy. Let me help you understand what was going on. When Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt, the Bible reports there were about 600,000 men, not counting women and children. Now, scholars estimate there were probably about 2.5 million people total. That's more than 3 times the population of Boston today. So you can only imagine how many squabbles and disputes that many people would have had in the best of circumstances. But these people were always on the move. They're living in a desert. They're foraging for food. They're encountering new enemies. So their stress level had to be over the top. And in moments like that, people tend to get uncomfortable and irritable and angry and easily offended. And this entire population brought all of their problems and conflicts to Moses. You know, people lined up for hours for a moment of Moses' attention. But people hate to wait. You know how exasperated we can get if you have to wait in line at the grocery store or you have to sit in traffic 30 more minutes than you'd planned on. So you can imagine that sitting in the hot sun for the whole day with your adversary waiting for Moses only made people more annoyed than they'd been to begin with. I mean, it'd be like going to the RMV and poor Moses is the only teller available. Moses' busyness was out of control. And the first clue we get about this is way back in verse 2, where we read that Moses sent his wife and kids away to live with his father-in-law for a little while. Yeah, just until this busy season blows over. But it wasn't blowing over. This busyness had become Moses' new normal. And some of you know what that's like. You get up in the morning, you check your email right away to make sure you didn't miss anything, and then you rush to school or work, and 5 o'clock comes, but your work isn't done. You said, a little more to do, and you end up being late to that meeting or appointment or dinner with your family, but you're there. I mean, they understand. You're busy. But the whole time in the back of your mind, you're distracted by that email you forgot to write or the paper that you haven't finished or the report that you're still working on. You're there, but you're really someplace else because you're busy. You finally get to go home or have some alone time at the end of the night, but you're still busy, right? A little more work, paying a bill, running an errand, worrying about all the things you need to do tomorrow. People in greater Boston tend to be very busy. Interestingly, although the average working hours in America have fallen by more than 200 hours per year in recent decades, according to a recent article in The Atlantic, rich, college-educated people, especially married men, work much more than they did years ago. We've made workaholism normal, even admirable. We boast that we're so busy because what it secretly means is that we're so valuable. People want our time and attention. They need us. I'd love to relax more, but I am too important to stop. At least that's the story we tell ourselves. That's the story that Moses told himself too. When Jethro finally brought his family back, he got to see how busy Moses had made himself. So Jethro asked, "What are you doing? And why are you doing all this by yourself?" Now, an honest answer might have been, "I love to be the center of attention," or "I want to feel important." But instead, Moses answered Jethro, because people come to me to seek God's will. Whenever they have a dispute, it's brought to me, and I decide between the parties and inform them of God's decrees and instructions. Do you see how Moses' reply betrays his sense of self-importance? They need me. I'm the only one who can do it. I am so special. Unfortunately, I know a little about this particular form of self-aggrandizing self-deception. Back when Hyrock was new, I was so important. We didn't have a big staff back then, so I did almost everything. Right? I preached the sermons, I planned the calendar, and I prepared the small groups. I prayed for people who were sick or afraid. I replied to all the emails. I repaired the conflicts between couples or friends. I even did the plumbing. Like seriously, one night after preaching a whole day of sermons, I spent the entire night over in the ministry center replacing a pipe that had burst in the night. I was really important. People needed me. So I kept my phone on 24 hours a day, and I promised to answer even if people wanted to talk in the middle of the night. I didn't take a single Sunday off for more than 6 years. I didn't take a single day off for more than 3. I was just too busy. I was so important. I convinced myself I was just an incredible servant. But what I couldn't see is that I needed to be needed. I needed to be busy to convince myself that I was valuable. I needed to be busy because I was afraid of the thoughts and anxieties that would catch up to me when I slowed down. Just keep running, I reasoned, and stay ahead of all that. My wife accepted my busyness because, who was she to take me away from God? And besides, I was so tense and self-absorbed. I'm not sure she really wanted me home that much more anyway. Our relationship was difficult, so it was easier to be at work, where I knew my role. I knew just what to say. I was an expert. At home, I felt like an idiot. I said and did the wrong things all the time, so it was just easier to stay at work. If you'd asked me how I was doing in those days, I might have answered busy, but I would have said it as a boast. What I wanted you to hear, what I wanted to convince myself, is that I'm so important, I can't possibly stop. I survived by cutting back on less necessary things, like time with friends or hobbies or prayer. Who has time for that? I was living without emotional or schedule or spiritual margin, but like people living paycheck to paycheck, I was fine. I was making it work, barely, but I was okay. Until a series of crises hit. By that time, the church had grown, and demands right along with it. And then we bought this building, which brought with it a ton of new stressors. There were repairs to manage and bigger bills to pay. I definitely couldn't slow down now because we needed to keep people happy and the congregation growing so we could pay the mortgage. I needed to run even faster. Then my mother was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And then my sister-in-law. And then my aunt, all within a span of a couple months. In the middle of all that, we abruptly adopted our 3rd child. Our 2nd child was a handful at the time. My wife needed more of me at the same time that my job needed all I had. And all the while, I'm trying to process all of the pain and sadness from all the tragedy in my extended family. I had hit emotional and spiritual bankruptcy. I didn't know what to do. I had nothing left to give. I was completely depleted. But I knew what I couldn't do is stop running. Several friends and the church overseers suggested I take some time off. A sabbatical maybe. After 7 years, it was time. But I couldn't stop now. We just bought this building. No, I needed to work harder than ever. Jesus asked, what good is it for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul. Or another time he phrased it, what good is it for someone to gain the whole world, yet lose their very self? I was doing so well in some respects, but I was losing my soul. How about you? You're busy. I know. You're doing very important things. I got it. I love it. I mean, I want you to do important things. But how can you tell if you're too busy? Busy in a way that's risking your very soul, your very self. Ruth Haley Barton lists a few of the common symptoms that show up in our lives when we're dangerously depleted and functioning beyond our God-given limits. Irritability or hypersensitivity, right? Things that normally wouldn't bother us, like a child's mistake or a coworker's annoying habit, just put us over the edge. Restlessness. All day there's just this nagging feeling that something isn't right and this like secret urge to run away. And at night we toss and we turn, unable to settle down. Compulsive overworking. We can't stop checking email, thinking about that paper or that project I need to get to. We find ourselves working all the time to the exclusion of other life activities and relationships. Emotional numbness. We don't feel anything, good or bad, because it takes energy to experience a full range of human emotions. Escapist behaviors, such as compulsive eating or drinking or substance abuse, spending, television, pornography, or surfing the internet, things to help us numb out. Not attending to human needs, like exercise, eating right, sleeping enough, going to the doctor, maintaining relationships with God, family, and friends. This is what was happening to me all those years ago, and it's probably what was happening to Moses. Moses expected to be praised and admired for all of his hard work, but when Jethro saw it, he exclaimed, "What you are doing is not good. You and these people who come to you will only wear yourselves out. This work is too heavy for you. You can't handle it alone." Jethro didn't pretend this was admirable. Moses wasn't honoring God by his hard work. Moses was pretending to be a god, thinking he had supernatural endurance and ability. Jethro knew he couldn't go on living this way. So he gave Moses some advice. You must be the people's representative before God and bring their disputes to him. Teach them his decrees and instructions and show them the way they're to live and behave. Yes, Moses, the work you're doing is important. It's too important for you to screw up by doing it the wrong way. So select capable men from all the people and appoint them as officials over the thousands and hundreds and fifties and tens. Have them serve as judges for the people at all times, but have them bring every difficult case to you. The simple cases they can decide themselves. That will make your load lighter because they'll share it with you. If you do this, you'll be able to stand the strain and these people will go home satisfied. Verse 24, Moses listened to his father-in-law and did everything he said. Jethro intervened, and it saved Moses' family, Moses' leadership, and Moses' soul. I had a similar experience all those years ago. When I refused to slow down, the overseers contacted one of our denominational representatives to whom I was particularly close, and they conspired behind my back. Then they came to me with an ultimatum. Mind you, these are people I loved. I thought they loved me. I knew they loved me. I mean, they'd shown it 1,000 ways, and yet that day they gave me an ultimatum. Dave, after such and such a date, you are going on sabbatical for at least 6 weeks, but hopefully more. Now, we can't control where you go, but you can't come here. Now, I should have been thankful, but at first I was indignant. Who do these people think they are? I'm the senior pastor. I'm important. They can't tell me to leave. This is my church. that internal dialogue was my hysteria and fear talking. But finally, their love won out, and I stopped. I went away with my family. For the first week or two, I was almost catatonic. So exhausted. I couldn't feel anything. I couldn't recover. I never wanted to go back. I was done. Then, slowly, mysteriously, I felt life start seeping back into my veins and my soul. I started having fun, getting excited about things again. I laughed with my wife and my kids and spent days accomplishing nothing and being amazed at God's creation. We had friends join us and we went on adventures. Another week or two later, I started having dreams about the future again. And I started talking with God again, and I enjoyed reading my Bible. Eventually, I came back to High Rock, but as a very different person. I still worked hard, but I resolved to never go back to that life of workaholism again. I put in better boundaries around my time, including a weekly Sabbath. I turned off my phone at night and started declining some of the meeting requests that I used to always say yes to. I'm not that important. I'm just one person. They don't need me. They need Jesus, and sometimes I only get in the way. You know, you can have lots of pastors in your life, and I hope you have some better ones than me. But my kids only get one father. And my wife, she only gets one husband. If I fail at that job, it really doesn't matter how much I accomplish at work. You know, I used to think I was just too busy to stop, but I realized in retrospect that wasn't the problem at all. The truth was that I was too lazy, too slothful to do the harder work of discerning what I should and shouldn't do. You know, we usually think of sloth as not wanting to do anything, but actually it's the refusal to do the hard work of choosing to do the right things. Instead of doing the hard work of relationships, we busy ourselves with easier tasks. You know, staying at work at all hours, or constantly checking email or Instagram, or forever doing housework, or updating my Facebook status, or taking vacations, or endlessly shopping. You know, I watch groups of high school students all gather together, just staring at their individual smartphones because it's easier to talk to the person not in the room than the person right next to you. Or, I skip my small group again because, a friend is visiting from out of town again, unaware that this is the way that I avoid true friendships under the guise of being a friend to someone I can't get too close to. We busy ourselves with trivial things in order to avoid facing the harder but more meaningful things that God may have called us to. The things that will require us opening up our souls and being vulnerable. Things like having a hard conversation to deal with a problem or reconcile a relationship. Things like praying and letting God speak to you. Things like listening to someone you love but give too little attention to. Have you ever listened to a 5-year-old tell a story? It can be painful. They ramble, they have no sense of plot line, they get distracted, and they don't care about chronology. So the story jumps haphazardly from this scene to that and back again without warning or reason, right? It's cute when you're babysitting your nephew, but it's excruciating when you finally get home after a long day at work, ready to take off your shoes and relax in front of the TV, and your kid wanders over with another babbling tale about what happened that day in which a stuffed animal is a leading character, right? Love requires concentration. But sloth is when I pick up my iPhone and I sort of thoughtlessly surf the web while pretending to listen. Oh, that's interesting. What happened next? I look like a caring parent, but my mind is 1,000 miles away. I mean, he talks, but I don't hear it all. 10 years later, that same kid comes home from school and he's asked by a parent, "Hey, what happened at school today?" Well, actually, a lot happened. I didn't do well in biology. I'm afraid I'm not going to make it to college at this rate. The girl I'm interested in, she keeps flirting with one of my friends. It makes me feel humiliated every time I see it. And my social studies teacher took another swipe at Christianity today, which I hate. But I also kind of wonder if he might be a little bit right. Can I really believe in Jesus? All this is swirling around in my head all day, but explaining all of this to my mom is going to be exhausting. So I mumble nothing. I keep walking right past her so that I can hide in my room and watch stupid videos on YouTube for a couple of hours. Sloth isn't being lazy about work, but being lazy about love. Sloth doesn't care enough to do the hard work that love requires. Sloth is the universal human tendency to settle for less than the full life that Jesus came to bring us. Our devotional life is flat. Our relationships are superficial. Our family is a burden. This work is tedious. It's not that we're lazy. We accomplish a lot. We just don't achieve much that matters. For me, it was easier to be at work than to be a husband or a father. It's easier to preach a sermon than share my heart. It's easier to fill a role that I was trained for. I know exactly what to say, and than it is to experience the vulnerability of intimacy where all of us are always bumbling and unsure. Maybe you find it easier to be a doctor or a teacher or a plumber than a person. It's a lot easier to write code than it is to have an honest conversation. When faced with an opportunity at work, I used to ask just two questions. Is this a good thing? And am I able to do it? If the answer to both those questions were yes, then I'd say yes. But then, as I got more opportunities and developed more expertise, this meant that I was saying yes to more than I could possibly do, forcing me to cut corners in places where I thought I could get away with it, including in my relationships with God and family and friends. I had sent my family away like Moses did, even while we all still lived together at home. I was saying yes to the least important people and requests, but that required me to say no to my family or to God because I just didn't have the time. I was busy. The truth is, I was lazy. I was afraid to be human. It was easier to just pretend to be a machine who can just keep working and keep busy and keep going, no emotions, never slow down enough to think or feel or hurt. I was gaining the world, but I was losing my soul. So I've learned that those two questions are not enough, and I've started asking two more. Is this mine to do? Meaning that it may be a good thing that I can do, but is God calling me to do this? I need to spend time in prayer asking God before I just capriciously say, yeah. And if so, if this is mine to do, then the final question is, what will I give up so that I can do this instead? I don't get 25 hours in the day just because I agreed to do more. So I can only say yes to anything if I say no to something else. Maybe this means no to one more hour at work or one more errand or one more phone call or one more email. Maybe it means saying no to one more episode on Netflix or one more night out so that you have the margin for rest and reflection. The truth is, I'm going to make these decisions either way, but if I don't ask this question, I'm probably going to end up saying no to things that I shouldn't say no to, like time with God and family. Those choices are inconsistent with my values, but they're just easier. The rubric I now use comes from Colossians, where we're instructed to let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts. The word rule here, literally, it means to act as an umpire or a referee. It means the peace of Christ gets to make decisions in my life. So when I'm debating whether or not to say yes to something, I ask, is it possible to do this and have the peace of Christ in my heart? Or will this make me frantic again? If I can't have both, the peace of Christ and whatever this other thing is, I got to let the peace of Christ rule. It's got to make the decision. I can't do that thing because I refuse to give up the peace of Christ again. I did that before, and I almost lost my soul. This means that I'm going to go to bed on time, even if my work isn't done. Well, the work is never done. Even this sermon, it's not as important as my spiritual life. And my spiritual life suffers as soon as I get too tired. So I have a million reasons why I should stay up just a little bit later tonight. But getting more sleep will probably result in better sermons. And it'll definitely result in a better me. And it'll give me the margin I need when one of my kids is sick in the middle of the night or there's some other emergency with somebody at the church. It means I won't reply to every email or show up at every meeting, which will mean disappointing people, but doing the hard work of choosing to disappoint the right people. Refusing to do too much gives me the margin I need when the people closest to me at home or at work truly need something from me. It can be difficult to accept our limits, whether in our finances or in our energy or our schedules. But God has given us limits. We're not gods. We're only human. As we were reminded just a week and a half ago on Ash Wednesday, you are dust, and to dust you shall return. So Paul warns us, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment in accordance with the faith God has distributed to each of you. He's saying we need to embrace our human limitations. God is the one with unlimited power who never needs to sleep. I'm not. So I can survive on 4 hours a night, but I only can do that by shutting down emotionally, which of course I excuse because I'm tired, because I'm busy. But that's just an excuse to avoid being human. Accepting my humanity means accepting that I need more sleep. So I can't do as much as I might want to. Someone has said that we're not human beings trying to become spiritual, but spiritual beings trying to become human. We're not gods. We have limits. With Moses in mind and reflecting on our list from earlier, Barton concludes that, quote, even if a few of these symptoms are true for you, chances are you're pushing up against human limitations, and you, too, might need to consider that what you're doing is not good for you or for the people you're serving. Many of us have been spiritually stuck for years, but we don't know why. Could it be in part because we're running from reality and our real responsibilities by remaining chronically busy and chronically exhausted, often from things that don't matter very much, but leave us too tired to engage deeply with God or with the people we love? My friends, Jesus did not call us to the frantic, over-busy, overburdened kind of life many of us now think is normal. To the contrary, even as the crowds pined for his attention and miraculous power, I mean, Jesus truly could do things nobody else could do, and yet even Jesus knew that he needed to take time away from the demanding crowds to be with his Father. Jesus was showing us how to be truly human, fully human, fully alive. And Jesus invites us into that same kind of life. Jesus wants us to change the world like he did, and yet he calls us to do it in a very different way than the world usually does. He invites us who are frantically running too fast, trying to do too much, thinking it all depends on us. Come to me, you who are weary and burdened. I'll give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. As I was approaching Lent this year, I asked, what patterns or mindsets were keeping me stuck, holding me back from following Jesus and fulfilling his call? And I realized it was my habit of reading the news. Now, that may not sound problematic, but I probably check my news app on my phone, I don't know, at least 20 times a day. The reality is, not that much happens on any given day. But the reason I check so often is that it's a responsible looking way to check out from the relationships right around me. Other people do that with Netflix or Instagram or Snapchat or Facebook or errands, or housework, or obsessive exercise, or something else. It's whatever we use to avoid being present with God and the people in front of us. So during Lent, I resolved to giving up checking the news app if anyone's around me, or even if I'm alone, if I've not had my quiet time with God yet that day. I want to do the hard work of not being too busy for the things that make me most alive and most available to God and those I'm called to care for. Are there ways that you might be too busy? Ways you've made yourself busy as a way of running away from the most important things? Have you, like Moses and like me, sent your friends or family away in some fashion by not giving them your full heart or energy or attention? You might find it helpful this Lenten season to work on a rule of life so that you can make deliberate choices about the way you're spending your time that lead to life, rather than just continuing along the path of least resistance by doing whatever's easiest or normal, or just whatever anybody asks you to do. The High Rock Guides would be glad to help you with that. Or perhaps you need to take a retreat and slow down, reconsider the pace of your life. What are the hidden costs of the schedule you keep? Is it worth it? Ironically, it can be a lot of work to break free from a long pattern of workaholism. If you want some help with that, there is a men's retreat coming up next weekend, which might be perfect for some of you. But we're going to start now by taking a few moments in silence to pray. And in the words of Psalm 139, ask, "Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there's any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting." You may be stuck, but you don't have to stay stuck. We can be set free as we follow Jesus instead of our frenetic culture that is crushing us. After reminding us of the triumphant lives of so many of the saints in Scripture, Hebrews 12 encourages us, since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. So let's ask God to show us any ways we might be stuck this Lenten season, including ways we may be using busyness as an excuse for laziness in our relationships with God or other people. We're going to take some time in silence now, and then Pastor Doug will lead us in a corporate confession in a little bit. I invite you to pray with me.